It's a pleasure to speak with you today about your film, which I had the pleasure of viewing.
Thank you for watching.
Yes. So we're going to talk about Things Will Be Different, which is your feature debut.
Yes, it is.
Um,
Yeah.
so what was that like, going from mostly directing shorts and editing to making your first feature?
It was just the hunger of like, wanting to tell these cool stories. Like basically, this movie specifically got off the ground for us and our team was because I love um sci-fi and horror and thriller, and I love uh watching those movies with my dad, who's a big sci-fi, like horror thriller film nerd. He works in like a completely different industry. He's an engineer, so he's all working with numbers and everything. And when he does finish his work, he wants to go watch these movies, get lost in these worlds, and he wants to talk to anyone who watched it with him over coffee for hours on end, whether it's like about theories, about possible scenarios for sequels, or just anything that happened with the world. And so when it's coming up with Things Will Be Different, it came from just us watching like a movie like 2 years ago that made us go to a coffee shop afterwards and talk about it for a while. And so when I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna try to make a feature," because he's seen a lot of my shorts, he's seen me and my editing work, but I'm trying to break out of this thing. And I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna go make this movie at our," we had a family farm in Michigan. Uh, I have this idea. Do you want to spitball it with me? And that's how Things Will Be Different became born. It was just lots of like wanting to make a movie for him that he would find very entertaining and get lost in. And that's what pushed me over the edge. And every short and film I edited reinformed making an incredibly fun and hopefully unforgettable experience that people can, say, I've never seen that before, and I want to talk about it for hours on end with a coffee after.
So speaking of your influences, what specific influences were there? Because I definitely had felt some, like, there were definitely some horror vibes in there. Um,
Hmm.
in addition to sci-fi, like I
Hmm.
was definitely getting horror.
Yeah, oh, good, good. Yeah. So for me, like all of my horror stuff came from working with Benson Moorhead, Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, because they started my first job actually was working on their first feature, Resolution. And that movie is about, the horrors of horror tropes and cracking them open and seeing what they actually mean to characters and people around them. And everything that I came from watching those, like was working on those movies, informed this movie. So not to give like an easy answer, but I guess their movies as for horror side influenced me quite a bit. And then science fiction wise, I thought about Looper, was one of my favorite movies. That movie is about like, dealing with heady sci-fi concepts, but it's just mainly when you look at the meat and potatoes, it's just people with guns in the cornfields. It's just you're able to find imagination and world building from things that you find everywhere around you. So I thought that was incredibly inspiring to me. But yeah, and then there's like a movie that I really like that is also a little bit horror based. Is a 2007 film, Time Crimes. It's a sci-fi horror as well. That's about like a man who on his property finds somebody that's there, and he starts to investigate who it is, and he finds a time machine there, and he gets in this like horrific loop of what's going on, and this goes down this rabbit hole, so to speak. And I found that movie incredibly fascinating because then again, that's a movie where the sci-fi and world building elements just come from the things that are naturally already around you. So hopefully I think I answered your question there.
You did. Um, and what did you find was like the hardest transition to make into directing a feature versus doing shorts or editing?
We had a that's a good question because there's lots of things that come from that are genuinely harder, not just it being longer, but we had this specific thing with our movie where we shot in two blocks. Not to spoil too much, but given that there's time travel elements, we shot a bunch in winter of last year and then had to wait for seasons to change and shoot in summer. So it became like mini shoots. It wasn't like we had to like a full feature shoot after adding it all up. But the hardest thing was actually, co-producing with my partners, Shane Spiegel and Jacob Rosenthal, who is just juggling so many different things. You're asking people for over the course of the year to be like, hey, devote a lot of your free time, creative energy to jumping in on this movie. And then with like a short, you could ask somebody to do it for a weekend, and it's not too much of an encumbrance, and it's not the budget's not too big. but everything just balloons so much bigger, and so that means you have to keep the plate spinning for so much longer. And if that with that 2 block shift, you have to keep the plate spinning for a whole year, and it, they're just gonna sometimes the plate's gonna come down and fall on the floor and crash, and you're gonna have to adapt, and that's what happened a bunch. So I think the biggest thing was learning to adapt as this a bigger project becomes more unwieldy, and still try to keep the nugget of what the movie was when you first came up with the idea and moving forward, and hopefully it comes across at the final product.
Can you speak a little bit about the expectations versus reality of directing a feature?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think what helped me, I have the benefit of having edited a lot of movies. And when you are an editor for a lot of feature films, you see literally what your script was, and then you start seeing the dailies, and it's literally expectation versus reality. So I learned a lot about what people imagine in their head and what that actually tangibly looks like when you put it on the screen and you have walls and people acting with words on that screen, because it changes. No matter how good of a filmmaker you can be, it will just shift a little bit. So the big thing I learned is practicing, like making a lot of movies. You get to see what works and doesn't work. And I feel like when I wrote this, I was like, okay, it's not about write what you know, it's write what you have. I think is the big thing that I learned for myself on an indie feature. So it's like, all right, I know what this looks like. I can write this. And when I shoot it, I know it's going to look still basically like that. And so my experience working with two-handers, doing with sci-fi and horror themes, and shooting in small, like, rustic locations, I was able to keep those expectations in check. But there's still going to be things that are thrown out the window because, you know, production woes happen, which is what happened to us a bunch of times. And the key is to lean on your collaborators at that point. Your collaborators are the ones who also know your vision, but know it even better from a different angle, like production design or costume. And they bring a lot of great ideas, and learn to just adapt to those, knowing that it's still part of the bigger vision. I try not to be like a filmmaker that goes like, oh, the candle has to be from this side of the frame and over here, and I have to have it be like picture perfect. Like, no, I feel like the better movies are the ones that come organically from the scene. Like when you find something in rehearsal that you didn't expect, you try to capture that and put it in the set the next day and shoot it. So I think the big thing is like, making things to help keep your expectations a little bit more tangible when you write stuff. And then when things do get thrown out the window, lean on your collaborators, because they will have great ideas that will sometimes make a situation even better than what it happened before.
Speaking of collaborators, because um, I've seen that you've worked with your co-editor, Rebecca Marquise
Yeah.
before. And
Hmm.
one of my big things is that I like the reason I think that editors also make great directors is because editors um are wonderful like storytellers themselves, because they're one of the people that also put together a story in the edit. And can you speak about your collaborative relationship with Rebecca and what she was able to bring to the film with you in post?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Rebecca was so great. I've worked with her. I've known her for about 15 years now. And I think she's just one of the most talented editors that I've ever seen work in the medium. And, I saw like, whoops, sorry. I'll go ahead and finish answering the question. So yeah, she's one of the greatest collaborators I've worked with. She did my last short. She and before this, Would You Like to Try Again? And I learned a lot from her perspective, which is like, she's, a female editor that grew up in Brazil, and she just watches movies in a different way than I do. And I think that perspective is so key, because when she edits, she gives each scene a new light that I couldn't quite understand, or if I'm trying to make a leap in logic, or if I'm trying to explain a lore thing, she will catch me on it and be like, actually this doesn't work, that this, or I think this is a better idea if we swap these scenes together. And she found so many magical moments that I couldn't have found on my own. And working with her in the edit room just elevated the movie into another realm and give me new perspectives that I couldn't see. So without her, this movie would be a little more stodgy, like too limited in my perspective. And she brought some great insight to, especially the scenes between our two actors, Adam and Riley, when they're talking. She found some magical moments that didn't even find until she showed them to me.
Um, Speaking of lore, um, I loved that you kind of like dropped us right into the story and you only were kind of giving us backstory as needed. But I just wanted to ask that there's something that always comes up, especially with sci-fis that deal with like any kind of like time travel. And I was like, so I wanted to know, did you find the balance for how much you talk about the rules of your like time circuit in the writing, the filming, or in the editing?
It's actually, that's a question that I always ask myself every time at every stage when I'm writing, directing, or editing specifically is a lot of like, how much do we need to explain versus how much we don't? Because I'm a big proponent of, you know, I'm a big proponent of like the 2+2, like making the audience add 2+2 so they can come up with four. That's like the one of the big, you know, storytelling rules is that if you give audience 2+2, they will add four and then they will love you forever. I like to push that even further, where, you know, especially with sci-fi and thrillers and stuff like that, I love to go like, here's 2+2, and then they add up five, and then they're going like, wait, why did 2+2 equal five? What does that mean? And then they think about it a lot more in a new context. So when we, you know, were writing and directing and shoot and editing the movie, there was a lot of times where we were like, how much do we need to hold the hand? How much do we want to let the audience swim a little bit and try to grapple with everything? Because, you know, it's important to keep, you know, not be too clear because our characters are not very clear about what the situation is either. So we want to be with our characters in as much as they know. But there's sometimes where we're dealing with a new heady concept, you kind of have to figure out elegant ways to let those rules unfold without it just being what I think is the worst tendency, which is just explain it to the audience like you're in a lecture, because then they won't process it, they won't take it and internalize it, they won't wrestle with it, they just treat it like a class. So I think we had a lot of tricky balances that, you know, some people might like it, people might not like it, where we give them enough of an answer to give them to ask them more questions, and if we don't answer that, you know, they can pick apart the movie and find their own answers. And I think that's magical to me about movies.
Like, Um, this is such an insular movie, which adds to like that mystery and suspense that we spoke about earlier. And I was one thing that I was very intrigued about was like the set design. Can you speak a little bit about how you established the world and that um place out of time?
You know, it comes kind of comes from, so I, you know, I mentioned my family farm. I grew up with a family farm, and when you're, you know, about 8 years old or something like that, or even younger, and you go visit a place like this family farm that's got a lot of rich history, but it's also like kind of removed from time, your brain kind of just imagines how that connects with your world here. Like, for example, as a kid, I like to have a big imagination, and I open this closet door and then it leads me to another world, very like Chronicles of Narnia kind of situation. um and when we did this, I just feel like there's something even more magical about being like, hey, you don't even know, but underneath this house is a whole history of things, and you can actually go and interact with it and take you out of time. And it's just about taking little tweaks and just, you know, moving different props to a different situation, and then you or taking like this fallen over clock and then putting it over here. And when you know, and shifting around props really helped not only like paint another out of time world, but also makes you want to connect to the world you just saw that you thought was your own time too. And, you know, I think there's a magic to just taking household objects like, you know, my cup of coffee here and putting them in a new context, and it reshapes your reality around you. I know it's like a really heady, like, you know, elevated answer or whatever, but I feel like the magic of our set design came from recontextualizing things that we have in our everyday life to give a new perspective.
Um,
These are great questions, and I'm hoping I'm giving you great
no, you're
answers.
giving me wonderful answers.
Well, thank you.
Um, I know that short films often work with small casts, but I mean, I imagine that working on a feature that adds like elements uh of a struggle just because it's hard to probably like work with like the scheduling of that just because there's not as many because that's a lot to put on people to work that many days in a row without breaks. Can you speak to a little bit about like though I guess you did have like the long break between your winter versus your summer filming. But just can you speak a bit about like how did you keep the I guess everybody kind of relatively sane?
That's a good question because that is one of the production hurdles that we had, which was like, we're trying to treat this as like, you're getting a 100-minute long experience, but you don't want people to know that there was stitching and we had these two big blocks separated. We just had like I think we got such a great rapport shooting in the winter block, and everyone knew we were coming back for the summer block that they came back eager with more and just wanted to make sure they kept the integrity of it all together. But I think like, you know, I when we're working in shorts, you only have like a certain amount of like emotional like scope to work with. You can't tell like a big grand story, and you definitely can't tell one with a lot of characters unless you have like very specific types of movies. And I feel like, when you work in features, the more characters you add, the less time you get to spend with each individual one. So it's important to me that when we did do this movie with just mainly two characters, um, that we really got to know their dynamics. We got to know how they felt on their own and the push and pull that came from this whole experience between this brother and sister character. And I wanted to keep the scope small so that way when we do jump into their like hearts and minds, the ocean is deep or deeper than you would get on anything like that. So, and Adam and Riley, who are actors playing Joe and Sid, just were incredibly committed to that. They found there was so much richness in each of their characters that, and the movie gave them time to explore, that they were able to deal with some of the production hurdles of like you have to come back with your haircut the same way, you have to come back in the summer with your beard in the same like, because we're telling the story in this long organic way, but we have this unconventional production hurdle. And they were a game, not only were they game, but they were they brought more to the table than I can even ask for.
Okay, and just to wrap things up, what do you what do you see for you trying to do next?
Oh, I love to do another one. No, I mean, I'm keeping, I'm a big proponent of don't count your chickens till they hatch. It's one of those things that I just got from working as an editor and making shorts all the time. So right now I'm just going in with the expectation that South by is just an incredible experience for us and a great venue for us to celebrate the movie. And hopefully we start finding fans of the movie who might give it a great home. XYZ Films has been also great in making sure that the movie is taken care of as well. So after that, and once we see that this movie can find a place where people can see it and become fans and explore and watch it over and over again, then I could probably be like, now what's the next one? And there's, a bunch of possibilities, but that's probably a little too forward thinking for me right now, trying to make sure South by is the best. So yeah, I hope that's an okay answer.
That's a fine answer. It was lovely speaking with you.
Yes, it was great speaking with you too. Please I will definitely check out your the website more. And thank you again, Carolyn. This was wonderful. You had great questions.
Thank you.